With the first pick in the 2019 NBA Draft, the New Orleans Pelicans select Zion Williamson from Duke.
Iguodala up for the layup. Oh, blocked by James.
They do have a timeout. Decide not to use it. Curry way downtown. Bang! Bang!
Oh, a spectacular move by Michael Jordan. Right back out to Allen. His three-pointer. Bang!
Mamba out.
How's it going? Welcome back to the Shot Clock Podcast. My name is Nathan Shaw. Today I'm with Ben Golliver. Ben, I appreciate you so much for coming on. I'm really thankful, man.
I'm thankful to you because, I have this book coming out on May 4th, Bubble Ball, and I love talking about it. I love the bubble. I was one of the few people who probably was, more on the side of, hey, this was a good idea. They saved the season. I know it was tough, and it really actually was a very challenging experience. But for me, I just thought it was important to kind of document, how the NBA wound up in Disney World, how they were able to keep all the players safe and healthy, how the Lakers were able to win the title in a very challenging year, and just kind of give a little time capsule for 2020, which to me is going to be one of the most important years in NBA history when you look back on it because of the controversy with Hong Kong and China, with Kobe Bryant's tragic death, with David Stern's death, and of course with the pandemic as well on top of it, and not to mention the social justice protests. So there was so much going on here over the last year. It seemed like the perfect time to write a book.
Yeah, I mean, you look at it, it was such a tragic year. I mean, you look at between, like you said, Kobe's death, the China problem that they had early in this 2019 season, even like you said, the social unrest and social justice movements. I mean, everything was just insane. And you experienced it firsthand in the bubble. For example, like the Bucks boycott in Game 5, I believe it was, of the Milwaukee Bucks Orlando Magic series in round 1. So what was that kind of like to be there firsthand during the social unrest movements?
No, you nailed it, Nathan. That was pretty much the peak moment, I think, in terms of interest in the bubble. It's crazy to say that the game that people cared about the most was the one game they didn't play, but that was exactly the case. I remember getting there. I've been covering the NBA since 2007. I'm sure you've covered a lot of games in person too. And you get there and you get your setup, you go through your routine. I got my laptop set up. I got my iced tea set up, my water set up, got my headphones charged. I looked up and I realized, wait a minute, there's only one team here. What are we doing? It's not too long until tip off. We got a problem here. And it was that kind of a spontaneous situation. And I remember, kind of sleuthing around the arena. What's going on? I walked past the Orlando Magic locker room. And I kind of peeked in their door and I could see Nikola Vucevic, their all-star center. And he's looking back towards the door with the same look I've got on my face. He had no idea what was going on. And that tells you how quickly it unfolded. And, actually wound up being kind of an old-fashioned stakeout. I love bank robbery movies. It's like, you got everybody waiting outside. What's going to happen? That's how it felt for us reporters. I mean, we were sitting there in the hallway for 3 hours waiting for them to come out and explain why they decided not to take the court and what the motivations were behind the protest. Of course, it was front page news on the Washington Post. It was all over every television channel, their decision not to take the court in response to the police shooting of Jacob Blake in Wisconsin. And so, to me, it was one of the most memorable moments of my career. And I spent a lot of time in the book kind of going through it almost minute by minute by minute to explain what it was like being there. And ultimately, it nearly ended the bubble. You'll remember how, tense it got in the days afterwards. For 3 days, they didn't play games as they tried to negotiate and put things back together to make sure that the whole experiment could carry on. Of course, they were able to do that with successful negotiations between the players and the owners. And so that was a big sigh of relief, because when I went down there, I was really intent on them crowning a champion. I'm a big fan of basketball history. This is the NBA's 75th year. Last year was the 74th year. In the first 73, they crowned a champion every single year. And so the idea there was going to be an empty space in the history book really, upset me. It made me sad. And so the fact that they were able to put the bubble together in the first place and then bring it back together after that protest and succeed in crowning a champion in October with the LA Lakers, it was just very gratifying for me as a fan of the sport, because it meant that streak stayed alive and that we were able to say, hey, look, this team, they beat all comers and they deserve to have that Larry O'Brien trophy.
Yeah, and one thing I remember from the Bucks and Orlando Magic protest was I remember sitting there on my phone in the living room. It was like early August or late August, early September, maybe. And I remember sitting there and swiping through my phone and seeing Adrian Wojnarowski tweet the Bucks Magic game. There's a protest going on inside, and then all the other teams. And then that whole night, it was like a whole domino effect. And it was, you had LeBron leading the Lakers, storming out of the building, leaving, or all that. So were you firsthand during all of the players gathering together during that night?
So it's very important to remember that in the bubble, they had like a bubble within the bubble to protect the players from everybody else, because their main goal was to make sure that they could play these games safely. There was no way to keep the players actually safe on the court. Like if somebody was sick, it could transmit very easily because they're indoors, they're in close contact. And we've actually seen that this season, with teammates getting sick all at the same time and outbreaks. So in situations like that, especially when they were away from the court, the players were totally isolated from media members. And so, you're all just relying upon whatever reporting you can do, from people who are in that meeting room, sharing details with what's happening. And I think that was actually smart on the NBA's behalf to do it that way, because, if one person got sick in the bubble, it could have spread very quickly and everybody would have potentially been at risk. But, absolutely, that was one of the most emotionally charged nights of the entire bubble experience. There was a lot of money at stake. And I kept coming back, to me, when I was seeing and reading and talking to people who were really upset about how the thing unfolded, and, the Bucks didn't give people advance notices. The Lakers were upset because they were getting ready for a game that night. They were trying to eliminate the Blazers. And a few of those teams, including the Magic and the Blazers, had they just played those games that day, they would have gone home. It would have been over. I'm getting some feedback. Is that on my end or your end?
That might be my end. I think so.
Okay, sorry about that. Can I just pick up, or I didn't screw this up, did it?
No, you're all good. You can just pick up where you were.
Okay, so yeah. So there was a few teams in the Orlando Magic and the Portland Trailblazers who would have potentially been going home if they had just lost that game that day. And instead, they're staying in the bubble for a couple extra days. So there was these logistical issues that were bothering some of the players, but also there was a debate about what's the right way to protest. And that had been going on for months. And so they had to work through those issues. Ultimately, I was really impressed by the compromise they reached, because what they focused on was this idea of voting. And to me, voting is nonpartisan. Everybody wants to vote, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. You should have access and the ability to vote. And what the players decided is, hey, let's try to really convince these owners. We'll go take the court again. We'll pick up this bubble, but let's convince the owners to use their arenas as polling stations around the country. And I think ultimately that was a really smart move, because there was a number of NBA cities, including Detroit, Milwaukee, Atlanta, and others, Philadelphia as well, where there was significant polling, turnout increases in those cities that are majority Black cities. And I think the NBA's efforts to help people vote really made a big difference in the 2020 presidential election. So I think from that standpoint, it was a very pragmatic solution. The cooler heads prevailed, and they got back to playing basketball in a relatively quick time period. One other thing is they didn't want to sit around forever. There was a little bit of a shutdown there for 3 days, but the longer you stayed shut down, the longer you had to stay at Disney World. So you didn't want to take 2 weeks off in August, because then you're stuck there until November. So that was motivation too. Not only the money factor, but the idea like, hey, just, grit your teeth, get through it, and everybody can go home once there's a champion crown.
Yeah, and I remember when I talked to Coach Forcier of the Milwaukee Bucks, I remember when I talked to him and asked, did you think there's an asterisk on the championship? Because, you go through Twitter or you go through Instagram, and some people, even like a lot of the older NBA fans, would like to say that this championship might have been the easiest that they won because it's like an AAU scenery, which they all bring up valid points. It's an AAU scenery, but yet again, they're playing throughout such hard times in the American history. So what's your thoughts on the asterisks on the championship?
I don't think there should be an asterisk on the Lakers title whatsoever. I think that they went 16-6 through the postseason, and they dominated everybody they played, for the most part. There was close games along the way. Obviously, they got a great buzzer beater from Anthony Davis against the Nuggets. And, Jimmy Butler gave the Lakers everything he possibly could, to kind of scare them in the NBA Finals. But ultimately, they were the best team there from start to finish through the playoffs, and that's what it's all about. It wasn't easy. Look, it was hard. And you heard LeBron James, Danny Green, Paul George, lots of different players talk about how challenging the bubble was. For me personally, when I was there, I put on weight. I slept way worse. My stress level and anxiety went way up. I felt isolated away from my parents, 3,000 miles, who are in Oregon, really didn't have much access to them. And, FaceTime is great for sure. And Zoom calls are great, but it's not really the same. Right. And so I think that all those kinds of things for the players were weighing on them, being away from their children. A lot of them were for months. That's challenging. Now, the one benefit was no travel. And that was a real nice change of pace for everybody, players, referees, and media members as well. But don't think for a second it was easy. And also you're just dealing with a lot of changing lineups, who was going to be healthy, who actually decided to show up and play there. There was a lot of variables. And so to me, by the nature of the resounding victory from the Lakers, there should be no asterisk on this title. And what's the alternative? The alternative is they don't play, and that would be far worse. An empty spot in the history book would be way worse than an asterisk. And I still don't think an asterisk applies.
You kind of mentioned a lot of players sitting out a couple of games and players not being healthy due to COVID protocols, but now you kind of see this ripple effect that's kind of transpired on the NBA today. I mean, you watch a lot of players sit out there's a lot more because of the schedule that they have this year. It's a lot more of injury prone players, and they're sitting out to kind of get that rest that's much needed. So what's your thoughts on players sitting out during these games due to social justice, or even sitting out? Like we saw the Minnesota Timberwolves and I think it was Trailblazers game the other day postponed because of a Minneapolis case that went on. So what's your thoughts on all of that?
Well, there's been a lot of schedule disruption this year for a whole variety of reasons. I mean, most of it has been either due to positive tests or guys who got caught up in contact tracing protocols. And most of that was in January, where the NBA really had a lot of games they had to move around. I think the Minnesota game was kind of a one-off thing. I mean, obviously because of some of the local social justice things going on there surrounding the George Floyd, Derek Chauvin trial. And so I don't see that really necessarily repeating. But to me, I see a bubble hangover is how I would put it. If you look at the last four teams remaining in the bubble, the Lakers, the Heat, the Nuggets, and the Celtics, all four of those teams have either dealt with slow starts to the season, major midseason injuries, or just kind of disappointing turns where the health of their players has impacted their spot in the standings. For the Lakers, it's the two stars, LeBron and Anthony Davis being injured. For Denver, they started very slow and then they lost Jamal Murray. The Heat have been up and down all year long, haven't been able to stay healthy and really capture that same momentum they had that last year. And Boston, to me, through the first half of the season, was the biggest disappointment in the league before they really turned it on here. Maybe it was because of those Brad Stevens Butler rumors kind of kicked everybody into gear there for you guys in Indiana. Maybe you had a hand in this new Boston Celtics turnaround. I don't know, but I don't think that's coincidence when all four teams like that are underperforming in certain ways. And look, the NBA is all about routines. Even guys like me, schmuck writers like me, have our routines of how we go through. What time do we leave for the arena? How long does it take us to get there? What do we do once we set up? How late do we stay up afterwards? All these kinds of questions. The players are absolutely creatures of habit. They want to do the same thing every single day, and they just haven't been able to do that. And they've been living with their very difficult health and safety rules too, in terms of not being able to leave the hotels. Now that some of that is going to ease up because of the vaccines, but still it's been a strange year. And so I think that I look at this season as the bite the bullet season. The NBA said, look, the pandemic is going to be here whether we want it or not. We just got to get through this thing as quickly as possible and get back to our normal calendar next season. Hopefully fans are back in the building next year and everybody's a lot happier and life returns to normal. And for now, you just kind of have to do whatever you can to get through it. And I think that's pretty much how it's playing out. All that being said, I'm really excited for these upcoming playoffs because I know guys are banged up right now, but some of those guys who are banged up have gotten the opportunity to rest. So LeBron should be coming back fresh. Anthony Davis should be coming back fresh. I think Kevin Durant is going to wind up being pretty fresh because he's missed so much time this year. And when the big stars are really ready to go and they're healthy, that's when you get that best basketball. And that's what I'm hoping for here for the playoffs.
You see my Lakers picture here, my LeBron figure here, and then Kobe up there. I'm a huge Lakers fan, so I know I'm excited to watch the Lakers come back fully healthy. But I know myself, I just got the vaccine yesterday. I was the first high schooler in my school to get the vaccine, and which was a kind of a big thing for me because I thought that was very important. But where do you see the importance of the vaccine coming in the NBA this season and even next season?
Yeah. So I'm hopeful that the will be our path to a more normal media environment in NBA as well, because right now we can't be courtside interviewing guys. We can't be in the locker rooms. Everything's done through Zoom, which is, it's a good option and it's like the safest option, but it's not maybe the most personal option. And I'm hoping is, in the not too, we can interview guys, interact with them, get a feel for a team, in their locker room space, after a tough loss or after a big win, some of those rich details, which really kind of help paint the story. And that was one thing that was great about the bubble. I was sitting courtside at these games feeling like Rihanna or Jack Nick because I'm right there and the great, in the house, I can hear all everything on the court, all the trash talking and all that kind of stuff. And that's a huge aspect to, being able to understand the game and cover it properly. And, it was very fun. Frank, that was one of the best parts about the entire experience. And right now this season, that's just been missing because of the pandemic, but it won't be missing forever. And I'm very glad you got your shot. And I think you should, everybody in your life and your classmates and everybody else, if you're eligible, go out there and get it.
For sure. That's my thought on it too is, in where the county I'm in is everybody's kind of afraid to get it. It's a lot of the politics surrounding my county, but I don't think they realize the importance of it is to get back to normalcy. And if they really want to get back to normalcy, even though the mask mandate is lifted, a shot is it's just a shot. The worst case is you get sick for a day after because of after effects, but then once that's over, you're all fine. It's just, you got to do your research, make sure you're confident in it. And once you actually do your research, you can feel that confidence and be like, okay, I think I'm ready to make this step.
Yeah, or just talk to your doctor, and I think most doctors would say do it. That's kind of what I've heard. Now, there may be certain exceptions to that, but to me, it was an absolute no-brainer. It really gave me a sense of relief and peace of mind. It's funny, when I was in the bubble, after a couple of weeks, it became clear the health and safety rules were working. Nobody was getting sick, nobody testing positive. And it was a big relief. It was really tough. We're wearing masks. We couldn't eat together indoors. We had to sit at the arenas all spaced out from each other. There's hand sanitizers absolutely everywhere. It was a very controlled environment. We couldn't walk or drive or off campus. We were kind of isolated, almost like a shield. And, hopefully, people who might be a little resistant or nervous about it will understand those benefits. And a lot of NBA players have been resistant to it as well, by the way. They've just been nervous for a variety of reasons. And I think the NBA has tried really hard internally to educate its players, to put them in touch with medical professionals who can kind of explain it. And that's something I did for myself. I talked to a number of doctors before I actually got the shot, and they all were unanimous saying you should do it. And so that made it really easy for me. Trusting the experts, usually that's kind of the way to go. Almost any field of work. I'm never going to be a doctor myself, right? So you better listen to them.
Yeah, for sure. And one thing you kind of brought up a couple of points ago was talking about your routine before games. So I commentate for the high school basketball games in my town, and I know my routine before games is I get up about 8 a.m, prepare a couple more stats, following a couple of days of preparing stats. I head to the arena and I get there about 5 p.m., 2 hours before tip off. And then JV is not even tipped off yet, like 30 minutes before. So I want to know if is that ever your routine to get there about 2 hours before tip off? Do you have like a weird routine whenever it comes to games?
You sound like a pro, man. You're ready to rock. I love it. You always want to get there early and you always want to stay late. That's kind of the easiest rule. For me, one of the reasons I get there early is because LA traffic is usually so bad. It's not as bad right now during the pandemic, but work the arena. They also have pregame press conferences in the NBA with coaches. So you want to make sure you're there. And that's usually like 90 minutes before tip off, kind of in that ballpark. So you want to hear what they have to say, if there's any injury update, that type of thing. And it's also just good for networking. I'm also a basketball dork. I like to watch the players warm up. I've loved to do that when I was a kid. I like to get there early. And the earlier you get, the more players you can see warm up. Kobe workout hours before. And all that kind of stuff, the headers that he does, the little that breaks out, the moon ball shots from half court. So there's a lot going on before games. So yeah, I would always say get there a couple hours early. And then for me, how late I stay depends on if I'm on a newspaper deadline or not. Because if I'm on the newspaper deadline, usually I can get out of there a little more quickly because I have to file right buzzer. If it's a column for the next morning, then I'm staying up late and writing that column and doing all the post as well. So a game day can be a long day, as I'm sure you know. But I think typically if it's a 7 o'clock game, I'm getting there around 30, and I'm probably staying. It could be midnight, 11:30 midnight before I'm getting out of there.
So I want to talk a little bit about the book Bubble Ball Inside the NBA. You have it right behind you. And I mean, you were there firsthand for it all, but really after the bubble hit, it had you were in. I mean, it seems like this book came out really soon. May 4th from October 12th is how long you had, or October 12th to May 4th is when it comes out. And I mean, you must have had to spend long hours on it. So I want to talk about a little bit about your process that went into making that book.
Well, I'm glad you asked, because it started in late October, and it continued real January 1st. So I pretty much wrote the first draft in about 2.5 months, and then I had to go through the edits for a month or month and a half afterwards. And then after that, your reward, you have to record the audiobook, right? It kind of never ends. And then after that, you got interviews like this one to talk about it. So it's been a whirlwind season. I wouldn't have been able to do it as quickly as I did if it wasn't a pandemic, just because it's been different. I haven't been traveling as much. It opened up some more free time. Real goal with turning it around quickly, I wanted it to feel fresh. I wanted it to be fresh in my mind when I was writing it, so that I was able to kind of capture the look and feel of what it was like there at Disney World, because that's what a lot of people were asking me along the way. Well, what's it down there? Is it as weird as it sounds? Is it scary? How good are the games? What are the players? How are they acting? And so, frankly, because it was a top of mine.
Yeah, and before we close off, I got to ask you a few more questions about writing for you work a lot closely with the Lakers. I mean, I saw a couple of things in the bubble. You were close with the Lakers. You had a Kobe moment yourself. So what was one of your most favorite Kobe moments that you've had?
Well, the Kobe moment that the Lakers love to make fun of me for, in his final, I had the choice. Do I want to go see Kobe's final game or the Warriors win the 73rd victory for their record-setting season up in Golden State? And it was a big talk radio. Everybody was saying, would you rather see the history or see Kobe's final game? And I had so many of Kobe's games that season. I made them, like I said, I'm going to go watch the Warriors finally break Jordan's record, 72 wins, right? And when I was there, it was really cool. It was special. It was some history. But everybody at that game, media members, and even the players after the game, all they wanted to do was watch Kobe for 60 in that final moment. So I'll never forget that, Kobe proved me wrong, and he made sure that I made the worst decision I possibly could. Now, in terms of some of my favorite, covering Kobe's career, he had an awesome game when I was still up in Portland, kind of going head to head, and he was trying to intimidate younger Blazers. And so he absolutely abandoned Barton, who plays for the Nuggets now, but was a young player with the Blazers. And Will Barton was a huge Kobe fan growing up. And so Kobe was playing mind games, just completely ignoring him on defense and trying to almost dare him to shoot and running around and doing crazy double teams. And this was not like a coach's idea. This was just Kobe messing with him on the court. And it was one of those situations where he's just such a ruthless competitor that you can imagine a young guy just being so intimidated to kind of be in Kobe's presence. But I'll always remember Kobe's press conferences too. The last All-Star game in Toronto, he went up there, and media members from around the world were breaking the protocols by bringing gifts to give to Kobe. They were giving him, fancy wine. They were giving him paintings. I think one had a big drawing of Kobe as a samurai swordsman. And the media is not supposed to give anybody gifts, let alone the actual players that they're covering. But there was so much respect culturally from a lot of these countries towards Kobe Bryant as a figure for the sport, that the reporters actually kind of felt like they were bringing the gifts on behalf of their countrymen. It was like, this is a gift on behalf of Japan. This is a gift on behalf of your fans in China. And Kobe took it in stride, as he always did, but I'll never forget, haven't really seen anything like that. And another one, his final season was pretty tough. The Lakers weren't very good. He was obviously, coming off of a couple of tough injury that covered in the NBA than Kobe, because he knew exactly what he wanted to say. So, to me, it was such a terrible loss for the sport. Obviously, way too young, and to his family, of course, as well. But I have a lot of fond memories. It's funny too, because when I was younger, I wasn't a Kobe fan by any means because I was a big Michael Jordan fan when I was a kid. So here's this guy who's trying to come and break Jordan's records, and here's the guy who's going to unseat him on the all-time list. And when I was young, I'd be upset about that. I was like, oh man, this is MJ. Don't be like the sequel. And I also remember, one time, Kobe scored 81, and against the Raptors. My first thought was, oh, well, that's more than Jordan. MJ is going to have to come out of retirement at like 45 years old. Going to have to go out there and score 82. Like, this can't stand. I can't have Kobe beating Michael on this very key statistic. It's not fair, Those kinds of conversations were always really fun. Kobe versus Mike, Mike versus Kobe, and actually heard Jordan reference in his tribute to Kobe Bryant saying, "Look, it wasn't about the comparisons. Just viewed this guy as a little brother." And Kobe said something similar actually on the stands, where he said, "Look, this wasn't about me versus Mike. This is about they played the sport."
Well, Ben, I want to thank you so much for coming on, talking about your book with me, talking about Kobe, talking about the bubble also. I appreciate you so much for coming on, man.
It's my pleasure. I wish you the best of luck with your career. Keep calling those games one step at a time, and hopefully we'll be seeing you in NBA arenas in 7 years, maybe? What's your goal?
My goal is to hopefully, as soon as I graduate college, get a couple of internships in, and then go to the NBA, go and commentate for the NBA or report for the NBA. I'd love to be a reporter as well. So. All right. And for the listeners listening, I appreciate you guys so much for coming up, for listening, and thank you guys. Go check out Ben's Instagram and check out his podcast as well if you want to go to plug those for me.
Yeah, I got a podcast, Sports Illustrated. It's Open Floor NBA podcast, and I have another show called Greatest of All Talk, the GOAT podcast, named after MJ himself. And LeBron's trying to sneak into that conversation too, which you can find at greatestofalltalk.com.
You guys for listening. Check out the new merch. Link in bio on @Nathan R. Shaw or @the Shot Clock Pod. And thank you for listening. All right, Ben.